I got my first paddle when I was 11 years old. It was a Black Beauty. Man, this thing is heavy. This thing's got to weigh 3-4 pounds. Oof. If I were to swing this today, my arm would fall off. Today I'm talking about paddleball in New York City. Here we go. I've been doing Restrung now for almost 11, 12 years, something like that. Most people know me for racquetball and outdoor racquetball, but I grew up in New York City playing paddleball. New York City has about 2,000 handball courts throughout the 5 boroughs. Now, I'm not claiming to be a historian, but I do know that handball was introduced to the city by immigrants in the early 1900s or something like that. So the city, in response to that, started building handball courts throughout the city. And that's a clear testament to the influence the immigrants had on the New York City culture. When it comes to paddleball, there really is a deep history in New York City. Now, I didn't start playing till I was 11, and that was close to home. As a kid growing up on the Lower East Side, I had easy access to handball courts. The game was hyper-localized for me. I mean, my mom played, her friends played. So names like Bobby Shorts and Howie Hammer, those guys were just names on a paddle for me. Like I said before, I'm not a historian, so this has to be more like his story or my take on what paddleball is in New York City. My earliest memory of seeing somebody like really come in and be an animal on a court was when I was about 12 or 13 years old. There was a local tournament for a local player who had passed on. It was called the Wilson Torres Memorial. And I remember it distinctly because it was the first time I saw this guy named Freddie Diaz play. Now, Freddie Diaz is kind of like a legend in the New York City paddleball community. He was called the Animal. And I remember seeing him come and destroy everybody in the tournament in like such a fashion that I was pretending to be Freddie Diaz for like months after that. Now, Freddie Diaz is still around. He works at Zariga. Everybody knows who he is. But at the time, I was 12 years old, and I saw this guy come in, and he hit the ball like nobody's business. And that for me was a spark. After that, I decided I really wanted to play, so I started traveling to other parts of the city by myself as a little kid, going to these parks where I didn't know anyone, but I would just show up and kind of like watch and then go off on the side courts and kind of like play on my own. I knew I wasn't good enough to play on those courts, and those guys seemed like gods to me. It was like hilarious. Now that I know and I see them in retrospect, it's pretty funny. But for me, that set my foundation for paddleball and racquetball and like paddle tennis. Anything that I play today, I owe to those early times. And as I visited these other courts, I found out just how competitive paddleball was in the city. There were at least 5, 6, 7 tournaments every month during the summer. And I remember I would just go and I would watch. My earliest memory of really serious competitive paddleball had to be the Budweiser Classic. The Budweiser Classic was held every summer for about 10 or 15 years here in the city, and it was really unique because it was a tournament that had competitions in each and every borough, the 5 boroughs. And then from those competitions, everybody would play for the Budweiser Championship. So for me, that was a spark. And then I remember traveling to these other courts and to these other tournaments, and they used to have these magazines that featured paddleball players, racquetball players, squash players. And I remember just kind of reading through these newsletters over and over again and looking at the pictures and being really inspired and then going home and wanting to play all my friends. And that was about the time that I was introduced to the courts at Carmine in the Village. And I remember seeing these pictures of these really good players and the storylines, and then I would go out and I would play. For me, that transformed my life playing paddleball. I would see these players, I would actually play on the same courts with these players. And then a lot of the young players, such as myself, we would play like in the afternoon and then we'd take a break. We would come back in the evening and we would play till like 2, 3 in the morning. And that's where I started kind of meeting my peers. That's where I met Robert Sastry, Sammy Cesario. There was a bunch of us. And we would just kind of like just be out there till all times of the night, and that's kind of how we got to know each other. And I remember as I kept on playing and I kept on growing this sport, I was mentored by like a lot of really good players, and they know who they are because they're still people that I talk to on a regular basis. And that's one of the really unique things about what's happening here in New York City where paddleball is concerned, because we have a whole generation, well actually 2 or 3 generations, that still play together, and they all have individual memories about like what paddleball means to them. And it's something that you can feel when you go to these events. Now, I'm going to talk about a few of the people that keep these things together. If you're ever in New York City, these are the people that you want to kind of reach out to, or you kind of want to follow if you're really interested in playing or just experiencing what paddleball in New York City is like. One of the people who are responsible for how paddleball looks today in New York City is Mike Melendez. Mike Melendez is a legend in paddleball. Mike's been very active since his return. He started a foundation called Paddleball Family Alliance. They're working with local community groups and continuously holding these youth paddleball clinics, which I never thought I'd see, because I personally thought the game was dead. But you have someone like Mike Melendez and the people that are helping him out at PFA doing these really good things. It's kind of inspiring.
What year came back to paddleball? 2014. I came back after being away 22 years.
22 years? Why were you away from the game so long?
Oh, I went into tennis. I went into running marathon, and I just needed a break from paddleball. But you know, I'm back.
So before you took the break, how long were you playing paddleball?
Oh, before I took the break, I was playing for 21 years. 1 year. So
How many years straight did you really not play?
I won it 5 times in a row, and then I won it twice again after I lost.
So what made you decide to start PFA?
Well, you know, when I came back, I saw the game was kind of declining. I saw the youth was not there. I looked around, most of the players were over the age of 50, 60. I thought we needed, and I still believe we needed to inject the young blood into the game, and that's what I'm working on today, together with everyone else in paddleball, trying to bring the youth back into it.
They really are doing good things with the kids. One of the things the PFA has worked on is an update for the rules in paddleball. PFA has also established rankings, and they're throwing tournaments on a regular basis. Some of the stuff that they're doing is really, really cool. Paddleball wouldn't be what it is today without the PFA. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the AF Tournament of Champions. The AF Tournament of Champions is named after Anthony Fiorino, who is another legend in paddleball. Anthony's got a rich history of being super competitive. He's never really shy of letting you know that, but he deserves his due. And one of the things his tournaments do is it really galvanizes people in terms of wanting to compete on a really high level in paddleball here in New York City. Kudos to Anthony for having that vision. But that vision and much of what we experience today in New York City paddleball wouldn't happen without a woman named Liz Colon. She's basically the backbone of the AF Tournament of Champions, plus a host of tournaments. If anyone's throwing a tournament in New York City, Liz Colon is the first person that they contact, and she's the one that's kind of blasting it out to the community. She's the one that galvanizes everybody for food, for entering the tournament, organizing the tournament. It amazes me how much time she actually puts into this, and she does it out of love. And it's something that we're all super grateful for, and if it wasn't for her, half of the stuff that we've been experiencing here in New York City wouldn't happen. She's somebody who's foundationally lifting up the community here in New York City, you know, and she sparks people like Mike Waters. Mike Waters is another guy. I remember Mike Waters from years ago. He still has his long hair and his ponytail. He would show up and want to play nothing but singles. This guy was a guy that would just go to parks. He's like, if you mention singles, he's the first guy there. But Mike Waters is the guy that comes and does the charts. He'll spend the whole day kind of like organizing the matches on the courts. You know, without those two, half of the tournaments that are thrown probably wouldn't be held. And I know I'm leaving out a lot of people in terms of like organizing here in New York City, but these are the people that reflect the spirit in which people actually throw these events. They're family affairs, they're hyper competitive, and they're fun. And the best part of it, at least for me, the number one thing is I know I'm going to see people who I consider family. And we talk and we laugh, and that for me is like the biggest thing. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm hyper competitive. And you know, there are guys who are sparking that too. Like you got a guy named David Blatt and Will Roland who have gotten together and they throw these wrestling inspired events fashioned after WrestleMania called Paddlemania. I mean, complete with the belt and the signs of the wrestlers with the names and the trash talking. It's hilarious. And Liz plays their manager. They play it to the T, but it's all done in fun. And that's the kind of thing that you'll experience if you come to New York City and you try paddleball. One thing I also want to mention specifically within the group is the attention to the women's events. We have a really good number of women's events, and these things are really inspiring because the women do really come out. They're more competitive than the men. I mean, they're vicious on the court, but they're also very loving. The really cool thing is that there are a number of male players who come out to support. Typically, you'll see like the men come out and we'll spend our time kind of like organizing, reffing, just in support for the women because they come out and they raise money. When the women throw tournaments, they raise money for really good causes and it's inspiring. Now, anybody who plays one-wall racquetball, paddleball is really easy. They actually use the same ball that the IRT uses. The purple pen ball seems to be the preferred ball of choice here in New York City. And these were the balls that were used. There are still some old heads that play with the little ball. Now, as I mentioned before, the paddles have changed over the years. I would not be able to swing this. But I use a gearbox paddle. These things are 10 times lighter. I'm like super grateful to these guys because they've been super generous in sending me paddles. And I can probably go on forever if I started talking about how I transitioned from paddleball to one-wall racquetball, how I met my partner, how I kept playing, how I kind of expanded that into what I do today at Restrung. But paddleball for me is the foundation for everything that I participate in. Just a huge part of my life. I love you guys. I mean, you're my family. Enough of that wishy-washy stuff. How about some gratuitous slow motion? Mike Melendez. What did I say about Mike Melendez? How old is Mike Melendez? One of those old heads. Neighbors ain't gonna like that. The neighbors ain't gonna like that. But clearly that these newsletters were passed out. And when I opened those newsletters, it was like an epiphany in terms of like, wow, this is what I wanted to do. These things are very New York centric, but these foreshadowed what I kind of see Restrung as. They included sports like not only paddleball, but they included squash, they included racquetball. That was the first time I ever saw a picture of Marty Hogan. That was the first time I ever saw a picture of Ruben Gonzalez, who I actually happened to meet when he started playing one-wall racquetball with us. Now, Ruben is a guy definitely from New York City, a history of growing up playing handball. The guy was a handball god in New York City, and then he picked up racquetball because he was working in a club in Staten Island. And after he became like this really good racquetball player who was like known throughout the sport, he started playing one wall racquetball with us, and that's kind of like how I got like seriously tied into playing one wall racquetball across the city. Now I know this is about paddleball, but it's very but the two things are very intertwined because the family that plays paddleball here has also played one wall racquetball. One wall racquetball at one time was the glue that held everybody who was the glue that held the paddleball community together here in New York City and helped them transition and keep that family thing alive. Mike, what did I write about Mike? What did I write about Mike? I can't even remember what I wrote. I suck at this. That's it.